Good afternoon. I'm Kate Kirby, CEO of the American Physical Society, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar titled From Passion to Action, Levers and Tools for Making Physics Inclusive and Equitable. We are pleased to be hosting this together with other physics-related groups, including the American Association of Physics Teachers, the American Institute of Physics, the National Society of Black Physicists, the African American Women in Physics, and Beyond the Standard Model pandemic seminars. I want to recognize Stefan Alexander, NSBP President and Professor at Brown University, James Gates, APS President-elect and Professor at Brown University, Lisa Randall, Professor at Harvard University, and Mel Sabella, AAPT Past President and Professor at Chicago State University, for putting the program together. Thank you so much for your great work. I also thank Mark Doyle, APS Chief Information Officer, and the APS Communications and IT teams for supporting this effort. We're pleased to see that more than 3,900 people have registered to attend this event today. And as with all APS events, we expect participants to abide by the APS Code of Conduct, which may be found on our meeting's website. I hope you find this webinar both informative and stimulating, and encourage those who would like to stay on for the Q&A session after the panel discussion and a short break. Before I turn this over to Professor Lisa Randall, who's moderator for this webinar, and she will introduce the panelists, let me say a few words of introduction. Professor Randall studies theoretical particle physics and cosmology at Harvard University. She has a public presence through her writing, lectures, and radio and TV appearances. Several of her books have been on the New York Times list of 100 notable books of the year. She's a member of the National Academy of Sciences, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and is the recipient of several honorary degrees. She has been honored with major prizes and awards from the APS, the AAPT, and AIP. Lisa, I'm delighted to turn this over to you.
Thank you, Kate. So let me start by stating the obvious, which is this is really a remarkable event. This panel has the goal of sharing ideas and ways to make physics more inclusive and to offer suggestions for what individuals and organizations can do to increase African American presence and influence in physics. As such, it's a first, and as Stefan reminds me, it is in some respects historic. This panel reflects a lot of goodwill on a lot of people's parts, as the eagerness to participate and the number of people who have signed up amply demonstrates. And I'm grateful to everyone who's been involved. It's also an event that reflects anger, disappointment, and frustration at the slowness of change in the Black community, with the repetition of the same battles and in many cases resistance to change. The idea this afternoon is to build on the former in ways that address the latter. Before we begin, I want to say a few words about why I'm here, despite the obvious incongruity of my presence. We're all appalled by recent events, and many of us feel relatively frustrated and helpless to address them. The recent STEM strike, and here a shout out to the strike organizers, convinced many people to reflect internally about what's possible and what they can do. As physicists, our reach might be limited, however, we can have a big impact in our community. One that brings in more Black people and other marginalized people, and one that hopefully improves physics overall. People might think those of us who have been less vocal on these issues publicly don't care about them. But as everyone on this panel knows, and as every woman and every person from an underrepresented group knows, there are issues that need to be addressed sooner rather than later. And I personally believe strongly in a fair and just world, and hope that this panel will be one step to move us towards that. The key purpose of this event is to let Black students and all students know there's a community who cares about them. But this event goes far beyond that. And my computer's Education is often the one escape from limiting circumstances for younger people, and almost disappeared during the pandemic. Coupled with recent tragic events, it was important to find a way to reach more isolated students. So I called Stefan, who I knew could help, and together with Jim and the APS, NSBP, APT, AIP, AAWP, and my colleagues in the BSM pandemic seminar, this event came about. We won't address all student issues today, and we really hope this is the first in many events, and many of which will be brainstorming sessions with more people participating directly. This event, however, has evolved into more than that. It's an attempt for those of us in physics to come to terms with the slow rate of change in our community, precipitated by the horrible events of the last few weeks. Many have been violent, but many have been horrifying in other ways, as for example, the differential COVID toll or making voting nearly impossible in some Black communities, moving democracy and hope as well. Reminder of the different experiences in these terms of Black Americans. So this event has a second primary purpose. It's to ask how we, in our relatively small physical community, can participate and possibly make a difference. We want to share ideas for what each of us can do to move things forward. What are the systemic changes that can improve the pipeline? And once students and postdocs and faculty are on board, make physics more congenial and welcoming and frankly less prejudiced in the future. The panelists will sometimes reflect on personal experiences, but they will also share suggestions in the hope that they will help individuals and institutions absorb some good ideas for making change. I certainly don't know the answers, and I'm here to listen and reflect and engage, as I hope you in the audience are too. This panel contains people who have been thinking about the issues of race and STEM for a long time, some of whom have done careful studies on precisely this issue, and others who have lived the life of the Black physicist. I admire and respect them all, and they deserve thanks for doing this. In my generation, it wasn't necessarily to the advantage of underrepresented groups, and women in physics was indeed one, to single ourselves out and risk being pigeonholed. Coming up as a woman in physics, a lot of us had the strategy to just do the best we could and lead by example. The numbers were low enough that taking it one step per person at a time would make change, and simply encouraging participation could sometimes accomplish that. But I now understand that that isn't enough, and we need to create an environment where underrepresented people thrive, and this is doubly important for the African American community. It took recent events and reading and conversations, some with panel members here, for me to recognize the essential need for more proactive support for change. Today is different, and the kind of racism and violence we've seen is something that should have long ago ended. Such events highlight the limitations of my former strategy. Underrepresented minorities have to be heard. The physicists and thought leaders on this panel have done impressive science, but that's not what they will talk about today. We in the physics community know from experience that the way to solve hard problems is to share ideas, share expertise, and share reactions to provide feedback. We don't necessarily get the answer right the first time, but we build on mistakes to improve our calculations. No one here or in the audience should think of this as necessarily the definitive presentation of solutions to any problems, but you will learn some good ideas to build on. Whether or not you agree with everything that's said, we should all make sure to listen and to reflect. Even those of us participating in the event know it's an experiment, but that's how we learn. We attack ideas from the top down and the bottom up in the hopes they converge into the best possible outcomes. As we all know, physicists like to think they know everything, but we also know we don't. And unlike the rest of the world, scientists change their mind in the face of evidence and of good ideas they never thought about. The people on this panel are among the best people to provide guidance as we move towards better understanding and towards our goals. They've all thought about these things a lot. I'm aware that I personally don't know the answers, but I want to listen. And I realize I might screw up, so please forgive any inadvertent missteps on my part. Maybe we can even think of this as a positive outcome of the change in our way of life precipitated by the recent COVID crisis. There's a lot of bad stuff happening, but at least we're trying to do some good here. So I just want to give you some administrative details before we begin. There's going to be, after the event, there's going to be a long Q&A session scheduled after a 15-minute break. So I ask you to put questions in the Q&A box found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So to keep things focused, please don't use chat. We have a dedicated behind the stage team of pandemic seminar organizers along with APS technical support to help sort through questions and identify a diverse sample of questioners, panel members to whom they're addressed, and questions themselves. You're not required to do so, but feel free to identify as much about yourself as you like. Your name, your race, gender, whether a high school, college, grad student, postdoc, professor, or interested public. This will help them sort through and address as wide a variety of questions as possible. So having said that, Let's now hear from the panelists. So first off, it is a pleasure to introduce Professor Jim Gates, Brown University professor and APS president-elect. And I think it's fair to say that Jim was, of course, critical to getting APS involved with us and will continue to be involved in many ways. Professor Gates investigates the mathematics of supersymmetry in particle, field, and string theories. In 2013, he received a National Medal of Science and became the first African-American theoretical physicist elected to the National Academy of Sciences. During the period 2009 to 2017, he was a member of the US President's Council of Advisors under President Obama of the On Science and Technology PCAST. Jim, we'd love to hear from you. And you're muted.
Thank you, Lisa. First of all, I want to thank all the people who are actually tuning into this, because this started, as Lisa said, as an experiment. I got a call from Stefan, who had gotten a call from Lisa. And when I heard the level of interest, I said, I've got to reach out to other people. So I started calling other physicists and physics teachers, Beth Cunningham, American Association of Physics Teachers, the American Institute of Physics folks. And we quickly got to the point where this was going to be something that followed the pause by giving ideas to the community, levers and tools for trying to make this change. So what I'd like to do is a couple of things. First of all, a personal story. Many people don't know that I was the chairman of the physics department at Howard University, but you probably also don't know that I'm probably the only person on this streaming session who has looked down the barrel of a gun held by a policeman and possibly being seconds from having one's life ended. This happened to me when I was a postdoc at Caltech, and I can assure you I was doing nothing wrong. But I have been committed to this task of trying to make our world a little bit better place since that entire time, and that was in 1982 that happened. I've had writings presented before the Supreme Court defending policies that will admit African-American students to universities. And I continue this fight. I'll be 70 if I'm lucky in December. So time has flown by and we fought a good fight. But what I wanted to do today was to do a couple of things. First of all, let me make sure that everyone who is viewing this understands that the panelists are speaking for themselves and expressing personal opinions. We are not presenting ourselves in the role of authorities or leaders. We are people who are caught up in this problem and trying to make this country live up to its promise. So let me tell you about the APS and what we've been doing. Because what we need from folks who are watching the streaming program is we need your energy, we need your passion, we need your involvement. And probably a lot of you are wondering, involved in what? So first of all, let me tell you that the APS from the period of 2017-2019 created a strategic plan, and diversity, equity, and inclusion were one of the key points in that. And this was long before I got involved in the organization's leadership. So we were forward-looking even before this recent spate of violence that has racked the country, which has been relatively continuous. As I said, I know what it feels like to have a policeman draw a gun on me. I don't know how many of you out there have had that experience. It will concentrate your mind. So what I wanted to do is talk about the work that we've done at the American Physical Society, and as what we refer to as diversity, equity, and inclusion. Well, first of all, some numbers. I don't have to tell you that the African American community is not represented at a level that's commensurate with its participation in society. So we have a quick bunch of slides that we're going to run through. First of all, we're going to talk about physics. So if we look at underrepresented minorities and look at the college-age population, that's about 35% of the population. If we look at the number of underrepresented minorities, that is, and we look at bachelors, that's around 27%. But now let's look at physics. As you can see, the numbers drop precipitously. 10% of physics bachelor's degrees, 7% physics PhDs, and finally at the faculty level, 5%. So you can see that diversity is something that's lacking. Can we have the next slide, please? So what do we do here in the APS? Well, one of the things is we attack this problem. And we've been doing this, in fact, for since approximately the 2010 period. And one of the programs we have is called the APS program. It's a way to get underrepresented minority school students into the PhD pipeline. because if you want to make a difference in the faculty, you have got to make a difference in the number of students who are successfully navigating that. If you want to learn about this particular program, there's a website. You can see it. It's www.apsbridgeprogram.org. And as I said, it's been working almost a decade, and we're starting to see some fruits from this program. Outcomes: over 250 plus bridge students have been placed in the physics graduate programs, and the first PhD graduates, which was only 2, occurred in 2019, and we expect more in 2020. So what can you do? Well, make your institutions aware of this. Advocate for them to participate in this. We can use more hands on this. Next slide, please. The next effort that APS has really extended a lot of effort is something that we call, is joining in a national mentoring program. Later, we're going to hear about students and what they need, but you know, students' needs can't be met. It's like building a bridge. It has to be built from both sides. So yes, students have needs, but what is our capacity for fulfilling those needs? And the national mentoring program is one way that APS has constructed as a structure to join undergraduates with local faculty mentors. And this is a program that is actually showing some real strong signs of success. What can you do watching this? Well, maybe you can serve as a mentor. Do you want to learn how? Check www.aps.org/NMC. And then finally, let me go to the next effort. And then finally, IDEA. The APS is a membership organization, and therefore we derive our strength, energy, and vision from what it is that our members wish to do. So IDEA is a program that basically came from our members. The vision is we want to have a collective efforts of physics and related fields to become more inclusive in all social identities. So this is a program that's been funded. IF stands for Innovation Fund, by the way. That was created by our immediate past president, David Gross. And this is a project that we've been funding for about a year. Again, if you want to become involved and make a difference in real time and not just protest, go to that link. Go aps.org/APS-IDEA. And then finally, I'd like to tell you about our most recent effort, namely Step Up. It's a new program. It initially was designed to increase the number of women who join our profession. And it's a set of research validated lessons. But what's really interesting is it has been found in the studies to assess this program that this is about twice as effective when the students in question are minority students and encouraging them. So again, we actually need more teachers. So if you're a teacher out there and you haven't heard about the Step Up program, there's a link here in this video where we can connect you to the program organizers and get you involved in this process of building inclusive high school classrooms. Now, the other thing, I'm at the end of my slide deck, so let me ask Mark to take those down. And let me just end by making some statements. We know there's a lot of work to be done. We know that we have been decades at it with very little progress. We also know that our youngest generation is impatient with what has been accomplished. So if you want to make a difference, my message to you is, no, we don't have all the answers, just as Lisa said. However, we are open to taking input from you. We need you. And so one way you can do that is become involved with the APS, with our programs and as members. And particularly the issue of culture change. Well, culture is one of the most difficult things that one can attempt to change. But if you want to make a difference, join your organization, get into the fight. That's my message. So with this, I'm going to stop and turn this over to our next speaker. And during the Q&A, I'll be happy to interact with the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. That was really amazing. I think the programs the APS are doing, Bridge and Step Up in particular, are really fabulous. Can I just ask one question to you? If you're a high school student listening to this, or an undergraduate, what can you do to get involved in these things?
Well, the first thing is to know that there are people who will be open to hearing from you. I remember when I was in high school, I didn't know that. I would have not ever dreamt of reaching out. So the first thing is they can send me email. I mean, I know that we have 4,000 people, and I'm not, I'm not looking to be dumped on by 4,000 people, but for high school students, I talk to people all over the world all the time who don't know me. And if you would say, oh, I don't know your email address, all you have to do is go to Dr. Google, as I refer to him, type in Jim Gates and the word physics, and I guarantee you'll find a way to reach me.
Okay, thank you. So I think we're incredibly fortunate to have our next panel member who, as I've gotten to know a little bit, and clearly feels passionately on these issues. And I just want everyone to recognize how impressive it is that she's taken on this role, whose responsibility she doesn't take lightly. We should really be glad to be hearing from Farah Simpson, who's actually a student who's currently pursuing her physics doctoral degree at Brown University and is the NSBP board student representative, and she's a graduate student now. Her research is in experimental high-energy physics and focuses on models beyond the standard model, something dear to my heart. She's of Jamaican descent and completed her undergraduate degree in applied physics at Columbia University in the city of New York. And she currently serves as student representative on NSBP executive board. So we're looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. So my name is Farah Simpson, and today I'm wearing two hats. I am currently serving as a student representative on the National Society of Black Physicists Executive Board, but I'm also a graduate student at Brown University. I want to start by just telling you a bit about my experiences. I attended Columbia University for my undergraduate degree, and since my first year at Columbia, I knew that I wanted to pursue a physics PhD. However, I always felt that it was something that I wasn't able to do, and I always felt that there was no space for me. When I first met Professor Gates, Jim, and Professor Alexander, that was the first time that I was able to see mentors who looked like me. Before that, every lecture hall that I entered was a white man. And that's what we see in media, that's what we see on TV, that a physicist is a white man. And having someone who looks like me doing what I one day wanted to do had a profound impact. And students feel the difference in departments where they have mentors who look like them. So it's simple. We need more representation. We need to hire more Black professors. We need more Black postdocs. We need more Black students. So actively recruit them. And it's not enough to increase representation. How do Black professors, postdocs, and students feel within their departments? Do they feel invited and welcomed? Are they empowered by their departments and by our community? Are they given resources? Do they have positions that reflect the work that they do? Being Black and being female only reinforces my identity as a scientist. It only strengthens my work. However, that's not how the rest of the world may see it. In my senior year of undergrad, I told a very close friend that I wanted to pursue a physics PhD. I was thinking of applying to programs. His response to me was, of course you'll get into physics PhD programs. You're Black. There's so few of you. Imagine that mindset, that being Black somehow meant that I had to reach a lower bar, that being Black inherently meant less work. And how do we solve that? How do we change the hearts and the minds of people? So I challenge you all here today to find a reason for the conversations that we're having today. Find the value in diversity, the value in the Black scientists. Why is it important to have the representation of all groups in scientific conversations? Why does diversity matter to you? Because I can give you a list of action items and we can do all the diversity initiatives in the world, but it won't matter if you don't want to do the work. We've been talking a lot about carving out spaces for Black students, Black professors, Black people within existing organizations that have often overlooked us. And this is necessary work. However, there are also organizations and groups that have been seeing us, that have been having conversations that we're having here today, that have been doing the work that we're saying we want to do here today. They've been talking about systemic racism before George Floyd. They were created in direct response to systemic racism. Some of those organizations are National Society of Black Physicists, African American Women in Physics, Black Girls Who Code, Vanguard STEM, just to name a few. We as a community need to uplift, promote, and support these organizations. I hope that I was able to shed some light on the problem, but also offer some solutions to us here today. And I hope that we as a community can work actively and consistently towards change.
Thank you, Farah. That was amazing. So I'd like to ask you a question.
Yeah.
Which is really two questions, which is, what is the best advice you were given as a student, and what is the best advice you think you would give to a student today? And if you don't know the answer, you could just say some good pieces.
Some of the few advices that I've been given that empower me today is just knowing that I'm not alone in these feelings that I have. I'm not alone in feeling like some days I can't do this because of who I am, and knowing from other faculty that they've also gone through what I'm going through right now. The advice that I would give students, especially those who look like me, is that no matter who you are, no matter where you come from, I'm from Jamaica, I am here on an international student visa, like no matter where you come from or who you are, you can achieve everything that you set out to achieve, because the only thing separating you from your dream is hard work.
Thank you, that's amazing. If it's okay, I just want to take a minute, speaking of people who look more or less like us, as a shout out to Ann Nelson, who I think would have really been here and been part of this today. And it's very sad that she's not here. So there's been a lot of challenges in organizing this event, as you might imagine, but one unambiguous reward for me has been getting to know our next speaker a little bit. The extremely thoughtful and compelling Arlene Modest Knowles, AIP Team Up Diversity Task Force Project Manager. She successfully guided the Team Up project to the completion of its first phase, which culminated in the first ever AIP expert report. The time is now. Systemic changes to increase African Americans with bachelor's degrees in physics and astronomy. This 2-year project, which involved a comprehensive research study by Team Up, was aimed at understanding the reasons for the persistent underrepresentation of African American physics and astronomy. And I'm going to let her tell you about that, obviously. Formerly, Ms. Knowles spent more than 2 decades managing, coordinating, and contributing to diversity programs and projects with AIP Physical Society, including the now retired Minority Scholarship Program, the National Mentoring Community, the LGBT and Climate Report, and many others. And currently, she's overseeing the implementation of the Team Up report. And I just want to say, personally, I'm very grateful to her for some really thoughtful conversations and some really interesting insights. And I think we should all look forward to hearing what she has to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, for that really wonderful introduction. Let me just share my screen really quickly. Okay. So first, I want to just appreciate Farah's remarks, because a lot of the things that questions that she brought up and that the recommendations that she had actually can be found in the Team Up report. So let me just go ahead and quickly tell you about the Team Up report. Team Up is the task force to elevate the representation of African Americans in undergraduate physics and astronomy. And the task force was charged by the AIP Board of Directors to examine and assess the reasons for the persistent underrepresentation of African Americans in physics and astronomy at the bachelor's level, and to produce a report with evidence-based recommendations for the physics and astronomy community to increase the number and percentage of African American students obtaining bachelor's degrees in these fields. And that is what we delivered. Now, when we named the AIP Team Up report, the time is now, systemic changes to increase African Americans with bachelor's degrees in physics and astronomy, we did so because for decades, the fraction of African Americans earning bachelor's degrees in these fields didn't move in any appreciable way. Even as the overall number of physics bachelor's degrees more than doubled and continues to reach its highest levels. But also because our study revealed that African American students have the same drive, motivation, intellect, and capability to obtain physics and astronomy degrees as students of other races and ethnicities. However, the persistent underrepresentation of African Americans in physics and astronomy is due to the lack of a supportive environment for these students in many departments, and to the enormous financial challenges facing them and the programs that best support them. And so solving these problems requires addressing systemic and cultural issues. And so we felt at the time that the time was now for the community of physicists and astronomers and administrators and professional societies working with public and private funding agencies to take action so that African American students could begin to not just survive, but to thrive in physics and astronomy, and ultimately to reach the goal of more than 500 African American students earning their bachelor's degrees in these fields in a decade per year. Now, when we named the report and we released the report in January of 2020, we had no idea that in a few short months, a global pandemic that would disrupt and claim the lives of hundreds of thousands of people and disproportionately affect and kill African Americans in the US would happen. Or that in the same few months, the world would witness the brutal murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and learn of Breonna Taylor's death. And that these deaths would set off protests around the country and the world, calling for an end to racist policies, policing, and practices, and in fact, an end to anti-Black racism. And these events not just also sparked a grassroots movement within the physics and STEM communities, calling for a one-day strike for Black lives and a shutdown of STEM to end business as usual, so that STEM professionals and academics could commit to actions that end anti-Black racism in STEM and in the academy. But what these events have done is to renew and re-emphasize that there is an even greater need to provide support for African American physics and astronomy students who do not leave their identities outside of the physics classroom or lab. And what we know is that racism and inequality in the broader society and within academic spaces deeply and profoundly impact African American students' ability to succeed in physics and astronomy. We could not foresee the events of these last few months, but now more than ever is the time to act towards systemic changes. And we believe that the AIP Team Up report is an important resource and tool for the physics and astronomy communities to create sustainable, positive change for African American students. Key features of the Team Up report: it centers African American student experiences, like you heard from Farah. We conducted original social science research, and we built on previous scholarly work. The report has 20 findings and 25 evidence-based recommendations for the community to begin this work. It focuses on systemic and culture change, and it provides a framework and a roadmap for departments in the community to address the issues hindering the success of African Americans earning bachelor's degrees in physics and astronomy. So we hope that the community will read this work, the report, and begin to take action. So you can download it at our website.
Thank you. And definitely one of the things that happened during the strike in some places were people paying attention to this report and reading it and discussing it. One question I have for you is, it seems like a lot, certainly a lot of women, but I think also minorities, participated in some sort of summer program, which I think sort of helped them cement their interest and sort of belonging to the physics community. What did you guys find about those? Were they useful?
Summer program. So what we found is that there were 5 factors in the report that contribute to the success of students. One of them being belonging, another being physics identity. And to the extent that students who have been traditionally minoritized can engage in work that is the work of physicists, that is engaging in summer research and that kind of thing, it helps them to build their physics identity and to see themselves as future physicists and astronomers.
Yeah, in my case, I went to math camp. So thank you. That was I really do heartily recommend that everyone takes a look at the report. And there's a really beautifully done executive summary too, even if you don't read the whole report. So thank you. Thank you very much. So I've known the brilliant and brilliantly named Professor Philip Phillips from University of Urbana-Champaign, back from MIT. Consistent with his name, he received his bachelor's degree from Walla Walla College, which is fun, hilarious. But he received, after that, he got his PhD from the University of Washington, and then had a Miller Fellowship in Berkeley, and joined the faculty at MIT, and then came to the University of Illinois, and does theoretical condensed matter physicist. Has an international reputation for the work on transport in disordered and strongly correlated low-dimensional systems. And he's done quite a bit of impressive work. And I just want to say that I've never said this directly to him, but from afar, even back in the MIT days, I was really impressed both by his outspokenness, but also his intelligence and sharpness. And I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say.
Thank you, Lisa. I want to thank everyone. I'm coming to you from the safety of my bedroom. I think it's safe to say that the efficient cause of this panel is the unrest arising from the murder of George Floyd. Given this, it seems as if we have two questions to answer. One is, what is the response to Floyd? And two, how can inclusivity be advanced proactively? My main point is that these two problems, or these two questions, are related. After Floyd, I began to ask the question, what does physics, or in the larger context, the APS, have to do with police brutality? Initially, I said, well, there's obviously no connection. There's no equation you can solve. Then it occurred to me that there's an obvious connection, because the APS doesn't exist in a vacuum. Every year, they put their annual meetings in cities all over the US. In light of Floyd, the APS has a decision to make. Should they consider racist policing and the murder that results from it as part of the metric in choosing where to hold the March meeting, for example? To my mind, it seemed like a no-brainer that they should. For example, there is some precedent here. In 2016, the 2018 DayMob meeting was moved from Charlotte in light of that state's stand on LGBTQ rights. I forgot where it was moved to. So clearly that was part of their consideration. And just a small comment here, where you put a meeting has nothing to do with physics. It's not a physics problem you're solving, it's just a societal problem. So given all these considerations, I called up my friend Michael Weissman, one of my colleagues here, and we wrote this up, sent it to the APS line, to the presidential line. A longer letter about this appeared in Science on June 19, interestingly enough, and a shorter version of this will appear in Physics Today. So this is an actionable item that we're asking the APS to do, and that is boycott cities that have rampant racist police forces. And you would reward the cities by putting your meetings there that are taking steps to curb such destructive practices, because economics has always been a vehicle for social change. Now we know from all of the press that has come out of Minneapolis that Minneapolis was not an accident. The week we wrote our article, the New York Times ran an article that said that the title of it was "Police Use Force Against Black People at 7 times the Rate of Whites." And we used this as part of the rebuttal to the incredible pushback we got from the APS regarding what I think was a modest proposal, no pun intended. And interestingly enough, the 2024 March meeting is supposed to be held in Minneapolis. That's 4 years. I have no idea what will happen then. So it seems to me that the question is not, should the APS get involved, but rather, why would they put a meeting in a city that has such a track record? It would be a sign to me that the society is not doing due diligence. it would be a sign that you are not cognizant of your Black members. This is tantamount to placing the concerns of its Black members outside the organizational mainstream of the APS. That is, there are those who have inside concerns and those who are clearly on the outside. And this is not a good thing. Those of us who are racial or cultural minorities know how outsider status can play tricks on your mind, how it can lead to self-doubt because of always being on the outside looking in. This is a very big problem, and Shakespeare devoted a whole play to this. It's called Othello. Othello's proclivity for self-doubt because of his racial outsider status led to his downfall. All the stuff Iago whispered in his ear, he believed regardless of its truth value. And this is a problem that is not unique to minorities, but it's certainly accented if you are a racial minority. And Iagos can come in various forms. They can come in the form of high school, college counselors who, without looking at your transcript, simply says, well, you clearly aren't qualified to attend the state university, the public university in your state. When I was at MIT, my friend Roger Brooks, who was a professor in Lisa's department in physics, we were having lunch one day and we started talking about this. He said, the same thing happened to me. But what is unique about Roger and me is that we actually asked the counselor, what classes do you need? Now, most don't ask that question. Most just walk away. So in terms of dispelling the doubts that are in your mind, knowing that the APS speaks for us would be a major force in changing the script on who is in and who is out. So in light of Floyd, to my mind, the problem of inclusion has gotten much more layered.
So thank you. That is certainly a provocative and very interesting suggestion. My one question for you would be, how would we decide, have you thought about how we would go about making this decision? I mean, there's maybe some obvious cases, but how would we decide this?
Okay, so what's interesting is that the Guardian ran an article in which it summarized the research by the University of Chicago Law School, in which the 20 largest cities in the US, their police forces were analyzed, and it turns out none of them are in compliance with even the basic human rights. For example, in Indianapolis, it's completely legitimate to shoot someone if you think they are going to commit a felony. And felonies range from all sorts of things, like mail fraud. So if you think someone's going to commit mail fraud, you can shoot them, and that's completely okay. So, so clearly that top 20 list should be excluded. There are several reforms which are supposedly trying to be addressed now. I don't know exactly what what criteria are emerging as the sort of core concerns that would have to be in place so that we don't have another Floyd. But certainly certainly a city in which it's okay to shoot someone because they might commit mail fraud should not be on the list.
Yeah, I think we could all agree on that. So thank you. It's a very interesting suggestion. I'm sure the APS will be thinking about it. So one thing that was challenging in doing this event is how to reach out to students at different levels, and especially younger students, which is something I personally really care about, but I'm sure everyone does. The idea that these students are at home isolated, not in all cases, but in many cases. And we really wanted someone involved who could reach out to that kind of thing. And I have to say, I didn't know Mel, but I've come to really appreciate the thoughtfulness and dedication of our next speaker, Mel Sabello, Chicago State University and AAPT past president, the American Association of Physics Teachers. And he's a professor at Chicago State University, a predominantly Black institution on Chicago's South Side. His research and teaching focus on improving STEM education for students underrepresented in physics by identifying and leveraging resources, strengths, and culture of the community to build inclusive classrooms. He was named an APS Fellow in 2019 as co-director of the CSU Learning Assistant Program, and serves on the LA Alliance Leadership Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So greetings, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. I'm really encouraged by the fantastic turnout for this event. And I'm excited to share some of the work that the American Association of Physics Teachers is doing to support inclusive physics classrooms from kindergarten to university. I'm also extremely excited to learn and get ideas from my colleagues on the panel, our moderator and facilitators, and especially from everybody participating here. There's a lot of work to be done, but it's really exciting to see this critical mass of folks really ready to engage in this work. So like Lisa said, so I'm a faculty member at Chicago State University at the school on the south side of Chicago. It's one of my favorite places, and a lot of my experiences come from my school. So I've been at CSU for about 20 years, and I work with awesome students, awesome colleagues, and there's so much I've learned from my CSU community. So as a white faculty member at a PBI, my hope is that my students and colleagues see me as an ally. And what does that mean? And I think to me, that means that I need to do the work and listen to the community I work with. And my instruction really needs to leverage the strengths and resources of the population I'm working with. I want my physics classroom to be a place where students can bring their whole selves to. I have certainly seen how systemic racism affects students in my classes. And it's important that we recognize that physics is not taught in a vacuum, right? And we really need to challenge the idea of meritocracy. And I encourage folks to check out AAPT's statement on fostering safe and inclusive learning environments. It's got also a set of resources, but it's a powerful piece that I think has helped me kind of think about these ideas. Another thing that I think has really helped me tremendously is sort of listening and following Black scientists and activists of color on Facebook and Twitter, both in STEM and outside of STEM, reading what they're writing and reading what they're suggesting I write. And I think this is especially true as a white physicist. So with AAPT, I think one of our major strengths is that our membership is pretty diverse in terms of teaching roles. So our members are mostly teachers, K-8 teachers, high school teachers, two-year college faculty, and college and university faculty. So the organization has this really broad expertise in the organization with a lot of folks with diverse experiences. I especially want to highlight the crucial role that K-8, high school, and two-year college faculty play in this work. These are the folks that are interacting with students early on. These are the folks who really have a rich set of expertise and skills to have a major impact. And it's really essential that our K-12 and TYC faculty have funds to support instruction and to support them in playing leadership roles in this effort. Jim and Arlene showed some of the numbers in terms of physics majors and physics graduates. And it's really important that we get students early and we help them develop science identity early. And this is something connected to what Arlene said and Farah said, right? So AAPT's 2019 strategic plan has diversity, equity, inclusion front and center. And we see this particular goal as a goal that is infused in all of our other goals. And it's clear that our members want this. AAPT has had diversity, equity, and inclusion sessions for many years, but in the last 5 years, we've really seen the amount of attendance at our sessions just kind of grow tremendously, which is encouraging. So I'm going to share some other ideas that come from our members, our area committees, our staff, and our leadership. One of the things we did with the shutdown for STEM and the strike for Black Lives on June 10th was the executive officer and the presidential chain met to kind of see where we were and also construct action items. So AAPT is taking a leadership role in the Physics and Astronomy Sea Change. This is a program led by the AAAS, but the idea here is that it supports institutional transformation in support of diversity, equity, and inclusion. There are multiple organizations involved in this program, and really departments are looking to do this work and change the culture in their settings. One of the things that Shirley Malcolm says about Sea Change is that the idea here is that you are changing systems and not students. And I think that's a really important thing for us to keep in mind as we engage in this work. We publish something called the Physics Teacher Magazine, which is really great. And they have done 2 recent theme issues, one on race in physics teaching and a more recent one on sex, gender, and physics teaching. Many of the papers in this collection are calls to action for more work to be done in this area. And I encourage folks to really check out those theme issues. I mentioned the importance of high school teachers in the discussion and the need for resources to allow or to provide high school teachers an opportunity to do leadership work in this effort. So the American Association of Physics Teachers, working with the American Institute of Physics, have launched the Underrepresented Teachers of Physics Fellowship. This partners early career or pre-service physics teachers who are from underrepresented populations with experienced folks from underrepresented populations to build a community of experts to increase diversity in physics and physics teaching. The other thing we're doing is we've had diversity, equity, inclusion workshops at our national meetings for the last 3 years. These are workshops run by outside experts. They're held during our regular meetings and they're free to our members. Our members have organized a people of color discussion space at our meetings, which is really powerful. And we support a number of meetup groups for our members at our meetings. Our virtual meeting is very much up on our minds. It's coming up. And one of the things that we decided to do on June 10th was add a plenary spot for a speaker who is going to do research in diversity, equity, and inclusion to talk explicitly about racism in educational spaces. I get to work with Arlene, is the chair of our Committee on Diversity in Physics, who helped identify the speakers for this. So we're really excited about that. Yeah, I think Jim talked a little about culture. Culture is a hard thing to change, right? And I think it's really critical that professional societies really put processes and structures in place so that we can continue this work, because it can't be the role of a champion or a set of champions in an organization who are often transient. Culture change in an organization, I think it comes from membership, but leadership in the organization has to cultivate that and kind of support that culture change. You know, as an organization, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to continue to make mistakes. We ask our members and our community to hold us accountable for that. We all know how, you know, resources are limited and education is severely underfunded.
So Mel, can I ask you a question
Yeah.
in this respect?
Sure.
So you've talked about culture, but high school, I mean, or undergraduate, not undergraduate, but like elementary and high school education, I mean, there are real problems with the way it's funded and the way it's designed. I know that I grew up in New York City, and the schools there are actually much less diverse now because of policy changes that have been made than they were in the past. And that gives many fewer opportunities to people that grow up in disadvantaged neighborhoods. I mean, what are the routes to addressing that? I mean, that's government policy, and that's very hard to change. What can we do about that?
I mean, I think you're totally right. You know, I think these are systematic things that need to change. I mean, so APT is certainly struggling with even high school membership. And that's because those kind of professional development sort of opportunities are often not supported. And we need to really put more resources and more funds to the schools. And not just that, I think we need more representation in physics to go out to those schools, attract more students, and this is a big issue. But ultimately, we need to have high school teachers and KA teachers play leadership roles in this work. They need to be at the table helping us make decisions. And I think that's really important. And that's the type of thing that my hope is that changes sort of those systematic things.
So miraculously, we're almost finishing on time. We also have a fair number of questions already in the Q&A. But I remind you, we're going to take a break now. And then afterward, you can look forward to Stefan Alexander joining me. And we will try to go through some questions with the help of the behind the scenes pandemic seminar people who will help sort through your questions. I just want to introduce Stefan because I'm looking forward to him coming up on the so-called our virtual stage. He's a Brown University professor and he's the president of NSBP. And he's a theoretical physicist, musician, and author whose work is at the interface between cosmology, particle physics, and quantum gravity. He's a professor of physics at Brown University and the president of NSBP, and previous appointments at Stanford, Imperial College, Penn State, Dartmouth, and Haverford. And he's a specialist in the field of string theory and cosmology. And as you're going to see, he's a really thoughtful person, a very dynamic person, and he will engage with your questions as well. So I want to thank all the panelists who I think have given us a lot to think about. And I think it's been really interesting in that we see that there's a diversity of opinions and ideas, and there's a lot of work to be done to talk through these things. And I look forward to future events in the future. We're not going to get it all done today, but for now, please feel free to submit questions. We probably won't get through all 200 of them or however many there are, but we'll try to answer a few and try to get at some issues. So thank you, all of you. Okay, so we have a lot of questions, not surprisingly, so we had some very interesting, provocative ideas. I'm super happy to be joined by Professor Stefan Alexander from Brown University. He is actually president also of the National Society of Black Physicists. I realize I've been using the acronym, but you should all know about this organization. It's doing good work, and Farah was the representative, and it's really important. So he's going to say a few words, and then we're going to both field some questions together.
Hi, everyone. Just I want to say I was really moved by and what everyone had to say. I really especially resonated with what our NSBP student representative to our board, Farah, where I come from is really about passing the baton on to the next generation and truly empowering them and learning from them about ways in which we can serve them. We're not perfect, and we'll, so I think that this is kind of where many of us are coming from, and some of the questions, of course, will be coming from students as well, and just put a plug to the National Society of Black Physicists. For the last 40 years, we've been carrying this. We have been carrying the baton of very much a society of Black physicists, very outward-looking, where we support the success of our students and our professionals in light of 40 years of not really having the resources to do that. We've been doing this work. Many of our our students in NSBP became presidents, including our very own Jim Gates was also a past president of the National Society of Black Physicists. All Black members actually on this panel are actually members of the National Society of Black Physicists. So I just want to say big up to NSBP as part of our larger community in terms of partnering with APS. And I just want to give that plug to my the organization that I so dearly love and that's made me whatever success I have, I owe much to the National Society of Black Physicists. So I want to now turn the baton back to Lisa.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. First of all, I've been told that many people are asking for links to resources and information about the background poster. So that information will be made available after the meeting. And also, as will the recording and slides will be on the APS website. So first question, so from an anonymous attendee, which says, thank you for the panel. I was wondering if the panelists, especially Farah and Arlene, had thoughts on how to make sure we're addressing intersectional needs. For example, the unique needs of women of color and queer trans people of color. How can we make sure they don't get left out of the conversation? So I guess that's Farah and Arlene, so maybe Arlene will go first and then Farah.
Hi, yes, okay, that's a really good question. And I think it speaks to the fact that you need to have, the department needs to make clear what their values are. And the department sets the norms for what happens in the department. When people are working on trying to make systemic change, they can't do it alone. You need to have a group of people in the department who are working on these issues. So, Ed Bertschinger, who's working with APS IDEA, really talks a lot about this, and he was also the co-chair of Team Up, talks about shared leadership. In these teams, it's important to have people from different levels within the department who can bring up these particular issues. It's important for departments to connect with identity-based resources on campus. Once those needs are identified, to get some expertise on how to incorporate those the needs of their particular population into the department. So there's a lot of things that you can do, but I think it's important to have diversity within your departmental teams that are looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion. Make sure that voices are heard, make sure that the department understands and communicates that diversity, equity, and inclusion is a value in the department and will not be, not doing those things will not be tolerated. So that's what I would suggest.
Okay, Farah, do you want to add to that, or can I go to the, I just want to apologize to Dr. Jamie Valentine Miller. I thought there was a technical glitch. So there's a couple of other people we want to hear from before we go through the entire list of questions, which is long, and we won't go through it all. But one we're really looking forward to is Dr. Jamie Valentine Miller, founder of the African American Women in Physics, and who works now in the US Patent and Trademark Office, as did some other famous physicists we know about, I guess. So let's hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. As Lisa mentioned, I'm the founder and CEO of African American Women in Physics Incorporated. I was the first Black woman to earn a PhD in physics at Johns Hopkins University. And I started AAWIP out of a feeling of isolation during graduate school. I'm a member of the APS Committee on Minorities, and I'm the vice chair of the new APS Forum for Diversity and Inclusion. So with all of that, I would like to, I suspect that a lot of people who are on this chat are asking themselves, well, what can we do? And so I would like to challenge physics departments to really think critically about how they can support and retain underrepresented minorities in their departments, particularly for Black women who face the double bind of navigating a field that is not traditionally Black and not traditionally female. Most of the students who come to us with problems either don't know who to reach out to in their department, or they're afraid that doing so will end their career. So here is my three-part challenge. It's quick. One, listen. Listen to your students and your alumni about their experiences and the ways that they feel that your environment can be improved. A lot of examples were given recently in social media in the hashtag Black in the Ivory. And even just yesterday, there was an article called A Breakup Letter with Astronomy from a young Black woman. It was published by Lauren Chambers on medium.com. So I'd encourage you to check that out and to listen to those voices. Second, ask yourselves, can a person in your department raise a complaint without fear of retribution, especially students and junior faculty? Ask yourselves, how do you plan to hold your faculty colleagues accountable if you see or hear something? And my last prong is to learn. HBCUs produce an outsized percentage of the students who continue on to complete PhDs in most fields, but also in physics. When I was an undergraduate, a professor from University of Delaware, Barbara Williams, came down and did a sabbatical year at my HBCU alma mater, Florida A&M University. I believe that she learned as much that year being at an HBCU in the South as I did in her physics class. So those are my challenges to you on ways that you can improve your environment. And I would also open it to the panel to see if they have any suggestions.
Okay, Thank you. So did any panelists want to respond to that? If not, I'm also actually, I think this is especially meaningful. We have a representative from Chicago Public Schools, Angela Newton, who's currently assistant principal at Chicago Public Schools, but she founded Englewood STEM High School, which actually I think I might have visited. It was pretty exciting. It's an early college STEM school designed to provide work-based learning opportunities to students while still in high school. And if I recall correctly, it's not even competitive. It's really amazing. But she's taught physics, chemistry, forensic science, engineering design, and engineering digital future. So Angela, you now have the stage.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? All right, so a little bit about me. I'm from the South Side of Chicago, and I'm a proud graduate of Chicago Public Schools. While in high school, I participated in several workshops for women in STEM at Argonne National Laboratory, which led me to major in chemistry in college. However, if my Black school counselor didn't force me, hair pulling and pushing to attend those conferences, I probably would have majored in political science in college. As a college student at Truman State University, I was the only Black female chemistry major in my class. I transitioned from a predominantly Black high school to being the only Black female in my entire college class. So my question to the panel is, how can this community of scholars increase student and family engagement in pre-K through 12 schools to assist with skills needed to be successful in STEM fields?
So whoever wants to step in to answer that, or else I'm going to randomly pick someone. So.
I'm willing to take the chance, Lisa. Thank you for offering. So Angela, my life is very strange in the sense that I actually have 4 careers. I'm a physicist. I'm in my 40th year of teaching college students, and I do public policy. So I think Lisa may have mentioned that during the period 2009 to 2017, I was on President Barack Obama's President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. And I can tell you from that activity that he definitely had his eye focused on issues of K-12 STEM education. We did 4 reports, by the way, on education during that period. They're still available online. People just have to put in the letters PCAST, PCAST, and STEM education. Just search on Google, you'll find them. And among the recommendations that we had that are directed towards your question is are a number of things. One of the things that we pointed out was the whole issue of out-of-school and after-school activities. These are activities that could, in principle, be organized in the community center. They could be organized in a church. Even, a set of motivated parents could organize these activities in order to bring the exposure of young people to science and STEM sorts of subjects, and to make it a very real experience, not something that sort of sits in the sky, but something that's accessible. So that's one recommendation that we had. But we had a series of them, and so I would advise you and interested people to, as I said, the PCAST, P-C-A-S-T, and STEM education, and maybe throw the word Obama in. Just do a search on that. You'll get to those reports and their recommendations.
Can I just follow up very briefly, Jim? I mean, as we know, the problem is that rich communities have a rich variety of these kind of programs and after-school programs. How do you address it in neighborhoods that can't really afford to do it? What is going to be done for those neighborhoods?
So some of the things that we pointed out in the reports is, yes, we're very much aware of this resource problem because there's an inequitable distribution of resources. And so for a lot of people, young people, children, their destinies in terms of education is determined by their zip code, because zip codes basically describe neighborhoods, and neighborhoods are where the funding for education at K through 12 level comes from. So the things that we advocated for in the report were for groups of citizens to become politically active around these issues, to say, you know, we want more for our students and from the structures in our society that are supposed to foster equitable outcomes. And so one thing is, you know, it's difficult to get around it, but if you don't organize, you don't really get a shot to make the difference. So that was one thing. But there also turns out that there are often unknown resources that are out there, but it's a matter of connecting. So again, the thing that we talked about was we don't, as we keep saying in this panel, we don't know all the solutions. We never claim to know all the solutions. But what we do know is that you can often find them because by actively and aggressively going to look and expending lots and lots of energy. As a parent, well, my twins are 27 now, but when they were much younger, I can tell you, my wife and I were always in our students, our children's teachers' faces. You have got to be engaged in school. And I know that that can be unpleasant for a principal, but if that parent involvement is not there, the students suffer.
Yeah. Angela, thank you so much for that question. I want to actually say something very quick. I'm the proud product of the New York City public school system. I went to Dubin Clinton High School in the South Bronx, 6,000 students. And one of the things that that happened during that time was that there was actually even at a volunteer level, local colleges like City College in New York, Lehman, where Black students who went to my high school were engaged in some sort of voluntary mentoring. It was very powerful. I learned calculus. And actually, it's interesting, with the leadership of our student council for National Society of Black Physicists, our student council leadership have been very forthcoming. And now in partnership with the NSBP executive board, we are now engaging in a volunteer K-12 mentoring program between NSBP Student Council, which are mostly undergraduates and graduate students, and collaboration with the Harlem Gallery of Science in Harlem, New York, in a K-12. This is something that we're engaging in. We'd love to get the support from APS and to help that kind of grassroots type of initiative, right? I think it's nothing new. We're not reinventing the wheel, but that's definitely something I know that the students at NSBP have been very excited and forthcoming in doing, and a great example of how we can learn from our students. And on that note, I want to, there's a question I'm going to ask, I was asked as well. And this is a question that came up a lot. So it's gotten quite a bit of frequency. And this goes to the panelists. Given that the GRE and PGRE tend to discriminate against minorities, does the American Physical Society discourage the use in graduate admissions? And in various departments, there have been an initial discussion on improving a number of minorities within our program, but it frequently devolved into an argument over if we stop using the GRE, we'll be missing out on some key piece of information. I want to actually add a little addendum to that. This is often the subtext. Whenever we try to become more inclusive, the subtext is always, oh, are we sacrificing quality? And that subtext, as we know, is coming from some sort of unconscious biases. So just want to throw that question out to the panelists.
Before we get to that question, can I follow up on your answer to Angela's question?
Very quickly, yes.
I gave a series of lectures in Detroit public schools that was actually through the APS. And that turned out to be very, very useful. And so I would say that things like that are in which, practicing scientists come in and do demonstrations and show them that physics is cool and it's done by people who look like them. That I think is something the APS could be very involved in.
Thank you, Philip. Yeah, that's a very good point. That's very powerful. That happened in my middle school. Fred Gregory came to my middle school, and which was located in the Eden Wall Projects, and that propelled me to want to become a physicist.
May I?
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay, that's a very complicated question. And unfortunately, I don't have an answer, but I'm happy to give it some thought. This whole, as you know, there's a whole evolving ecosystem around the issue of GRE exams and standardized exams. And some of our major university systems, I think it was recently announced that, for example, UC California is moving away from that. So this is certainly an area that needs to be looked at very carefully. And, we, as I said, APS is a membership organization, so we listen to our members. And on that note, let me respond to something that you said earlier, Philip. On the issue of your suggestion, I'm not quite sure where the pushback came from, because I was aware of the suggestion, but I did not see an official response. So let me just say that it is under advisement. So don't quite convict us without a trial, is my statement.
Well, okay, I've received some emails, and Mike Weissman and I constructed, should I say, responses to those emails. And I've talked with people on various executive committees, and I know that there is little support. So let's just leave it at that. This is not something that is being welcomed with open arms. Now,
So Philip, can you answer the question that you wanted to answer while you're saying
I
this?
think James asked me a question here, so
Yeah, okay.
which is different.
No, I was gonna say, okay.
I will respond to that in a minute. Yes. Yeah. So James, are we talking cross purposes here?
I don't know, but it might be although it probably is amusing for our audience. We can take this one offline.
No. Okay. So in terms of your question, okay, it might be premature, but I do know the initial response has not been, should I say, overwhelmingly positive.
Okay, we'll take that. As I said, this is not a finished issue. May I pivot? There's something that I think you, the panel and the audience might appreciate. I just got an email message from Neil deGrasse Tyson, who Lisa and I have both known for decades. And Neil writes this very interesting message that he'd like to have the panel react to. So Lisa, may I put this to the panel?
Stefan? I don't know. I have no idea what it is.
Yes. Phil, yes.
Okay, so Neil says the following. He says, my daughter teaches high school in New York City, and 97% to a 97% Black or brown student body. In that school and others, physics is not even offered in the four-year curriculum. In fact, Asian and European American students in New York City, in the New York City public school system, take the physics regents at 4 times the rate of students of color. How can this discussion enclose the fraction of minority students who are not even granted first access to our field? So that's the question that Neil is throwing out to everybody. And I can see from the wonderful faces that we're all stunned.
So I think this question relates to the question of education that we were discussing earlier on. So if anyone wants to follow that up, I mean, the fact is education is not equitably distributed in New York City at this point or elsewhere. I mean, even in my high school, Stuyvesant, when I went, it was fairly diverse, and now it's not. There's a real problem with the way the schools are set up at this point, and it seems like we really have to address that. So could somebody in the panel take it up from there?
So while people are thinking about that, I want to go back to the GRE. So Casey Miller has done some research on this, and I think that he worked with APS on this, but I could be wrong. And basically what he has found is that the GRE disproportionately disadvantages women and minoritized populations. And it doesn't actually really predict success in graduate school. So if you look for that research, you'll find that. And for those people who are saying, well, how can you admit people without the GRE? You can point them to that research.
And I should say that Casey Miller also put out something more recently, right, in response to some of the other concerns that are good for people to sort of check out all those kind of resources, right? That just came out maybe last month or something like that.
So before getting to the next question, the question I was going to ask Philip, which was related, which is coming down the stream, was, and Philip wants to answer it. So I just wanted to direct to him, what do police killings and lack of Black students have to do with one another? That's a question that was asked. Do you want to take it, Philip?
Yeah. So this question is, let me paraphrase the question so the person knows exactly which question we were answering. There's a question about some student, some person in the department said, what do lack of representation of African Americans in academia and killing of innocent Blacks have to do with one another. And I'd say the following. There are certain assumptions that we make when we see people. And I think the person who succinctly thought about this the best, I think, is Hannah Arendt. And she was asked, does race matter? And she paraphrased this in, does appearance matter? And she said, well, of course appearances matter because people appear to you. And so what this really means is that when you walk into a classroom and you see someone, and you have an idea based on what the appearances are of the level of confidence that you give someone. If in fact there is this dehumanization which is prevalent in society with a group of people, that is going to color the sort of mental map that you make in terms of what it is that you see when someone appears to you. So what do these have to do with one another? They're all part of the same thing.
Philip, can I respond to that? Because I want to recast that in a way that it gets beyond race. I have many female colleagues, and we have often talked about the fact that in discussions where physics is being done, and where, everyone is struggling to get to an answer, if one of my female colleagues suggests a possibility, it is less likely to be taken up by the group. So do appearances matter? We certainly see the evidence there.
Yeah.
Rather similarly with ethnicity, in my experience.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, in terms of level of confidence that you put in someone, all of these things that make that the more you deviate from what is viewed as the majority, then that's the barrier that you're trying to overcome. And that's what Hannah Arendt was so succinctly captured in the statement, of course appearances matter.
And if I may, I had an African-American PhD advisor, and when I defended, right around the time I defended my thesis, he made a very interesting statement to me, at least the way I recall it. He said, Jim, I'm sure you have the ability to be successful as a mathematical, theoretical physicist, but you may not have the permission to be creative and successful.
Yes.
That's what he was referring to.
Yes.
That's very powerful, Jim. And we see that a good example of that is with Jean-Michel Basquiat, the great artist. He, when as the story goes very quickly, is that he was, also a graffiti artist, and he was very much got not necessarily the permission, but the validation from Andy Warhol, who was a complete insider. So definitely resonate with that. The next question, and it's connected to what we're talking about, comes from our very own Nico Cooper, who's a physics major and interested in theoretical physics at Princeton University, and he's also a leader, plays a leadership role with the students at Princeton. Nico is also coincidentally on the student council for NSBP. Nico's question is, my concern is that the efforts to support women, people of color, and queer people in physics will be separate, but not intersectional, since persistence and support for minorities decrease as these identities multiply. And as I was reading that, multiply. Do AIP, APS, NSBP, et cetera, have concrete plans to invest in supporting Black physicists in an explicitly intersectional way? And I also might want to chime in because he asked about NSBP, but I'll let maybe AIP and all these organizations maybe respond to that. Very important question.
So let me just talk about, this is really a question about values, Stefan. So let me tell you what I understand about the values of the organization that I'm part of, that is the American Physical Society. Are we perfect? No. There are no perfect organizations in the world. We're all in transition. We're all in a process of evolving. The fact that the APS, as I said in the strategic report that was started now 3 years ago, came to the conclusion that it had to support all, and I underline all of its members. It is part of the values of the organization. Now, we're not there yet. As I said, we are evolving like every other organization, but this greater push to support people across different kinds of demographic divisions, including intersectionality, is something that as far as I have experienced the organization in recent times, yes, it has understood the importance of this, and more importantly, why it is in its own best interest to do this, because that's the real value. Is why do we value diversity at all? Well, I tell people that for me, a value of diversity is because I value excellence. And one of the levers for getting to excellence is actually diversity. So the answer is yes, we're trying. That's all I can say. If I may, I don't mean to dominate, but let me go back to Philip's point because I'm sorry, I think Philip was one who raised the question about GRE.
It was Stefan.
No, Stefan. To show you how interactive this panel is, I keep getting emails. I read you the one I got from Neil deGrasse Tyson a little while ago. I just got one from David Gross, who was our APS president of 2 years ago, and as many people on this streaming call will know, is a Nobel laureate in physics for his work on quantum chromodynamics, but apparently David has broad interest. And so he wanted to point out and made it known to our streaming audience that, so we have a part of the APS called COPA, which is on public policy. And they are debating right now the issue about what should be the role of the GRE. So you see, APS really is dynamical. And that's one of the things why I wanted to be part of this panel, to be able to convey that to all those people out there. When I invite them to come in, there are things happening already. I need your help.
So we have another question, and I do want to just mention this because we didn't really address it. I think Neil deGrasse Tyson's question is a really good one, and I think it's something that people should be thinking about, even if none of us have the answers to it. There is a question now from a student, which I'm getting out of Lauren Kaylee Jones, who's an undergraduate Black woman, and wondering to what extent, she's asking for herself, to what extent we should be holding URM students to do work on making physics departments more equitable. Are URM students, they offer specific experience and insights that can help the departments make changes quickly. But on the other hand, you don't want to overburden them with all the work. So how do you establish some kind of balance?
Can I speak to that? Because I am a student, and generally the work does fall on URM. And as someone who's very dedicated to this work and someone who loves to do diversity work, I want to pave the way in the same way that professors have paved the way for me. I also want to be valued for my work outside of my diversity work. And I think it's important, as I was saying before, that our entire community sees the value in the work that we're doing, not just underrepresented groups, and that we all as a community work towards this change, not just a few individual people working towards this change.
Can I add a little bit? That was awesome, Farah. Yeah, and I think the other thing that connects with me, and I think this is connected to Jamie's initial question a little bit too, in terms of like, how do you make sure people have voice in a department, right? And I love to envision my students as partners in the educational endeavors that we go through. So partners in how we teach our classes, partners in how we develop curriculum. And I would really encourage institutions, high school, KA, college, university, to partner with their students to develop curriculum that is going to work for everybody. And I think what that does is it develops a community that looks out for each other and understands each other and values each other's expertise. And I think that is one way to kind of do this.
Yeah,
So,
I would like to add to that too, because I think both Farah and Mel really succinctly answer that question. But in the Team Up report, we talk about this, right? We want to make sure that we don't overburden students and faculty of color when we're interested in making change around these issues. And I think an important way to do that is for those of us who are committed to making these changes to really, it's incumbent upon us to do the work first. You have to do the work. You have to educate yourself and understand some of the issues. And then once you do that, to then incorporate the insights and the experiences and the values of the group that you're wanting to support. So yes, you want to engage with people, but you don't want them to have to do all of the work and shoulder the full burden of trying to educate you around why DEI is important.
So I just want to give a shout out again to the strike organizers, because I do think they actually did take that point very seriously. I also, because we're coming to kind of towards the end, I just want to say there's a lot of amazing questions. And so if we have future events, I think there's going to be a lot of good discussions. But right now we have a question from Valentino Cooper, which I'm actually going to give a quick answer to, and then before moving on, because I'm asked this question a lot. Not specifically about Black people, but often about Black people or minorities or women. What advice would, or actually any student, what advice would the panel give to a Black person to help them get through imposter, or maybe we should call it Othello syndrome? Related to this, what can non-Black colleagues do? And I'll tell you that I'm asked this a lot when I'm speaking to schools. And one piece of advice I give, which is, I'd like to hear what everyone else says, is just don't compare yourself to the best person in physics that you're reading about all the time, or that did. Compare yourself to the person sitting next to you in the classroom. And are you doing as well as they are? And if you are, you can stay there. So that's my advice. And it usually helps. But let's hear what you guys have to say. And it's not to anyone in particular. So again, whoever wants to take this can take it. Philip, you can take it.
Okay, this is an interesting question. You know, something that Erwin Oppenheim, I think you might know who he is, because he was there when you were at MIT, told me, is that race is never neutral. It either helps you or hurts you. And given that you don't know, or you might know, actually if you don't know, then it's clearly hurting you. You tend to be paranoid. So I'm not really sure I'm answering your question. I'm probably giving you a deconstructed answer of your question. I think probably what my parents told me when we moved to the US was probably the thing that has stuck with me, is that you're gonna have to work harder than everyone else.
Can I jump in?
Yes.
I think one of the things that would be helpful for students that are dealing with imposter syndrome is actually not from the students' side, it's from the faculty side. And for faculty to be truthful with students and open with students to share their experiences, because I think sometimes that comes from students not understanding the struggles and the challenges that faculty had as they were coming up. And so to the extent that faculty can really share their experiences, it helps to normalize the struggle, right?
I think the other thing that goes with that is making sure that you call on all the students and let them speak. A lot of the time students get interrupted, and I think that's
absolutely
very bad too.
Absolutely.
And I think, sorry, I also just think, like, for a long time, I thought imposter syndrome was my problem, and it was because of me and because of my identity, but it's not because of me or my identity. It's because of the people around me and my society and the culture around it.
Also, physics is hard. Everyone feels it a little bit.
Yeah.
I think also sometimes students don't don't recognize all the awesome skills that they have. And I think it's partly up to faculty to help them recognize you have these awesome skills and you need to value these skills. And I think that's an important piece too. I'm amazed at what our students do, right? Like in class, in life, how they,
Exactly.
So faculty need to get that message out there too.
Absolutely. Faculty encouragement goes a long way.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And there's a book written about that. I won't mention the name of the book, where it celebrates sort of the genius of jazz and hip hop music, like literally, and finds parallels between that and the same kind of thinking done in quantum physics and relativity. So it's already inherent in a lot of our students in these populations. And faculty need to educate themselves about and learn some bebop skills and know how difficult that is. Another question comes from David Spergel. David Spergel is the director of the Center for Computational Astrophysics, formerly at Princeton University, at Simons Foundation. And David's question is how, now we have the emergence of private foundations with a lot of, leverage, financial leverage that's plugging into STEM fields and supporting STEM fields. So, how can foundations get involved in the plight? And I'm actually going to partially answer this question because most recently, actually, that's one of the things that happened when the strike for STEM happened, which was, really, I think, was catalytical in propelling us to really reflect on what are some action items. I was on a call from Brian Keaton at UCSD and David Spergel, actually, and they were like, what are some action items that the Simons Foundation and the Simons Observatory and the CCA can get involved with to actually help NSBP students right now, like this summer. And I said, oh, that's really amazing, because we have a handful of students, quite a few, who lost their summer jobs, and they're sitting right now with, trying to figure out what to do next. Many of them are trying to figure out what to do next semester. And so we launched a program called the Simons NSBP Scholars Program and a mentorship program where the students, we're taking about 28 students this summer as we speak to engage in a research program, a paid research program, to work with faculty across the nation, especially at the Simons Observatory and the CCA and the Flatiron Institute. And we expect to grow that program. And that's a very, very good, I think, action item. It's something that's really happening right now as we speak. And so I definitely want to thank, Jim Simons and Marilyn Simons for working with us to make that a reality. So hopefully others other foundations can play ball as well. And yeah, so any responses from the other panelists about that?
I think no one can object to putting resources into these issues.
Right. This is an example of individuals who are watching this process becoming inspired to be of assistance. Here in this country, economics really is a large part of it. Most people, if you ask them questions like, what are the disparities in economic development? Well, in salary, the average African-American family makes, professional family, makes 60 to 70, maybe 80% of what that family makes if they're of another ethnicity. But in terms of wealth, the difference is a factor of 10. So the African-American community is a remarkably under-resourced community in this country. And so it's no wonder that we find these disparities in outcomes. So I was recently, the Team Up report had an interesting suggestion, and Arlene didn't go over it in detail, but they talked about these financial barriers. What could be done about financial barriers? And they put out a call for a fund to be raised. Now, even in today's newspaper, we hear about very wealthy individuals endowing colleges and universities to try to make a difference along this particular barrier. But I have also been in conversation with Professor Edmund Bertschinger, who was the co-lead on this Team Up report. And they are now currently talking about ideas about how this might be done in terms of providing a sound financial basis to make a difference. And of course, I'm sure they'll be looking for donations, but the point is that we are starting to see evidence that people are listening in a way that's never been seen before. And that's one reason why I'm extraordinarily encouraged and to be alive.
So it looks like we've actually reached the end of our time. There's some amazing questions. Do we want to take one or two more questions, or do we want to end it? I'm asking the panel. Should we take one more question?
And is there any stone unturned, actually, that you're burning?
I think this is a good question here, which from Rachel Bordas. So I would like to ask this question, if it's okay.
Okay.
Which is, I'm a white woman. She's professor and chair of her small department, and she's the only woman. She finds that her colleagues politely bristle when she raises issues of equity and diversity. And they seem to have a hard time separating statements about society in general from criticism of them as individuals. One approach, this is her words, I could take is to say, I don't want to spend my energy making them feel comfortable. However, I do believe these are good people. I believe they can be part of positive change. Indeed, they are my community. Do you have advice on how to have conversations about equity and diversity, which don't alienate white men? And this was from Rachel Wardis, which I think is where we're getting to.
Yeah. So look, I think the prime message for everyone who's still with us is get involved. Join the APS, make a difference. Join the NSBP, make a difference. Join the American Association of Physics Teachers. Let your passion actually become action. That's what we need. That's part of the reason why we want to do this. The AIP has this amazing team up report. Make yourself familiar that it exists. I can bet, if I just take a bet, I bet something like less than 40% of our audience ever heard of the team up report before today. Well, you know about it now, so you have no excuse, right? There's no excuse. And we're trying to get people in motion. That's how you get change, is by getting people in motion.
And I think her question, I absolutely agree with that. Maybe Angela, do you want to address that question? Because I think it's an important one. What role did she have to play? How does she deal with this problem? Is Angela there?
Angela, you're muted.
I am muted. I'm sorry. And can you repeat the question for me?
Basically, she's asking, as the only woman there, how does she get people to be comfortable talking about these issues and not take it personally, but realize there are just real changes that have to be made?
And that's an interesting question, because through my equity work with the University of Chicago, I always talk to people with a lens to let them know that that I'm open to their communication. So the other person has to really receive that information in order for it to be productive.
So I think that's a really important point. And does anyone else want to comment on that?
I think one thing Rachel might consider doing is have them read Othello. Because ultimately, it's about understanding other people's perspectives. And perspective taking is something that you don't really learn in physics. There's no perspective in Maxwell's equations. We all end up with the same answer. But there is perspective taking in life. And I think reading about what it is for other people and what it is to be in their heads is something that anyone can do. And literature offers you a wealth of stories that give you empathy and give you understanding of what it is that other people are experiencing.
And Philip Einstein would disagree with you. Because one of the things that Einstein said about innovation in physics is that the outsider, and I'm paraphrasing, it's not an exact quote, but the outsider often brings a different perspective that can be translated into breakthroughs in physics. So Einstein disagrees with you.
I just want to add a little to that. I think a lot of people don't understand that intent doesn't equal effect. Like, just because your intention wasn't to have a certain effect doesn't mean that it didn't have that effect.
Yeah.
So I think
I would say to this person that, find your like-minded people who think like you and begin to have discussions around this. Bring outside expertise into your department. Have a colloquium speaker that comes in to address some of these issues. And so that it's not always the same person, sort of beating everyone over the head around these issues. Change takes some time. It does take time. And the other thing is to see if the department chair or the leadership within the department, how they feel about these things, and if they're willing.
She was chair, I think.
She was the chair. Perfect.
Okay.
So then she can begin to bring some of the outside expertise into the department.
So let me just mention that American Physical Society runs a chairs meeting. And so there's an opportunity for her as the chair to share in the discussion that the national community of folks in her level are engaging. Because like I say, we don't know the answers, but I bet somebody out there does. So let's reach out and find them.
So
Lisa?
I think that was a good question to end with, since it seems like everyone has a lot to say and there's obviously a lot of room for discussion. So I think,
I'm sorry,
I'm good.
one final question.
Okay.
Why is my poster sitting up behind you?
Sorry?
Why am I on that poster sitting up behind you?
Because I basically thought, you know, we want to see a lot of Black physicists, so I put them behind me. Stefan's actually literally behind me. It just, I'm not very tech adept, and so I just put it on randomly, and this is where you ended up. But congratulations for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna let you end everything.
So I just want to thank everyone on the panel, everyone who helped with the organization, everyone who's behind the scenes, and you've heard their names before, and I can repeat them, but I think we all know who they are, and they really deserve. I mean, the pandemic seminar people just did an outstanding job getting these questions to us. The APS technical team dealt with the onslaught of people, which was way more than we could have even hoped for. All the panelists were fantastic. All the organizations brought a lot to the table. And I just want to say thank you to everyone. And Stefan, do you want to add anything? Stefan, are you muted? Stefan, are you there?
Yeah,
in that case.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I want to thank everyone, of course, for this. And this is the beginning of many conversations. And especially, I think, you know, this fusion now of all these organizations that played a role, the BSM pandemic, especially. One nice piece of interesting thing was one of my colleagues who was part of the pandemic, BSM pandemic, Cora Dworkin at Harvard, became a member of NSBP like the next day. So like that was like a great action item. And I think like we're already starting to see things move forward. And we hope that these conversation and action items continue as we move forward. So thank you all.
Thank you. Lisa, thank you so much. Jim,
Yeah.
Arlene.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Stefan.
Thank you so much.
Community.
Great.
Thank you. Florence, you were great.